I'm Kathy Weaver, and this is Chapter 1, Networking on Steroids PQ, a guide to networking in a world post-quarantine. We have discussed in my first book, Networking on Steroids, how networking is an art form with many effective techniques. We have also discussed how networking just means talking. Face-to-face networking was the norm in most cities and communities, allowing business owners, entrepreneurs, and employees to make that connection that would eventually, hopefully, result in new clients and customers. By definition, networking is sometimes referred to as a socioeconomic activity by which groups of like-minded business people recognize, create, or act upon business opportunities. With the global pandemic of 2019-20 not yet in our rearview mirror, how has what is being referred to as COVID-19 changed the face of networking? We have previously networked to create relationships and increase one's own network, one's reach, right? Many people during the spring of 2020 were in hyper-elevated urgency mode to obtain as many supplies as they could for their families. Who remembers the panic that ensued when toilet paper and antibacterial wipes and other cleaners were nowhere to be found during that time? People buying anything in enormous quantities was the new norm for shopping, if you chose to leave your house at all. People were scrambling to grocery stores in record numbers to secure canned goods, meats, staples like cereal and milk, and many comfort foods in case the stay-home order would last longer than the predicted week or two. A new term called social distancing became commonplace and the required format when going anywhere in public to obtain supplies for one's own household or even walking in one's own neighborhood. Restaurants were closed, churches were closed, daycare centers were closed, elder care facilities were closed to the general public and even to family members. Schools were not reopening after their scheduled spring break. Bank lobbies and credit unions, clothing stores and specialty stores were closed also. Hair and nail salons were forced to close down entirely. The only companies that were allowed to remain open were those deemed essential. Imagine, if you will, funerals being limited to only 10 people in attendance. Many survivors suffering the loss of a loved one during this pandemic took to cyberspace to allow their deceased to be mourned by the masses. Birthday parties and holidays were acknowledged by driving by a person's home and leaving treats, surprises, gifts on the sidewalk, driveway, or porch of their friend or family member. Videos of such drive-bys were posted on social media sites, perhaps to preserve that memory of the season into perpetuity. Family get-togethers and other gatherings were forced to be celebrated in individual households rather than restaurants and public venues. Parks and beaches were closed down, restricting public assembly at all, with 10 or fewer people still being the rule for any private locations. Did your networking group host after-hours events at sports venues, swimming pools, or outdoor theaters and concert parks? Yes, after-hours meetings were now held virtually, toasting each other for attending and surviving yet another week of quarantine. If anyone previously held their networking events in restaurants and other public places like coffee shops, COVID-19 put the kibosh on those meetings also. With restaurants being forced to close, other than a few that were able to operate via drive-through, curbside pickup, and even delivery, public in-person networking events were no longer allowed. Did you panic when the stay-home order was first established? Did you notice others who really suffered emotionally, being isolated from humanity? Did you reach out to your networking partners who lived alone to make sure they were at least chatting with someone and staying connected with friends and neighbors? Stay tuned for Chapter 2.